All right. Well, hello, everyone. We appear to be live on Facebook and as well as on Zoom. So welcome, everybody. We've got a bit of a, one second. Definitely have a little bit of a, let's see, share screen. Only host. Okay, that looks good. It looks like the live stream is going. Now let's see about all profile pics. So let me see. Okay, I'm trying to see how this is going to work on that page and all. Just wanting to see if there's a way that I can see. Sharing options. Q&A. Put those down there in case there's any questions. Okay, there's the live stream. Let's see, add profile pic, stop video, create a camera, video settings. All right. Okay. And welcome, Lisa. I'm trying to figure out exactly how this is all working and to make sure I'm figuring out who is here. And last time, Lisa, I was able to see the view from Facebook, which was a little bit helpful. Wait just a couple more minutes and see what's going on. And then we will jump into this delicious Sauvignon Blanc, which I am completely and totally ready to start drinking. Just got a couple more minutes and if you have any questions, Lisa, let me know. If you want to tell me where you're from, I would love to know. I'm Wes, by the way. I'm the winemaker at J. Wilkes and the brand ambassador for the Miller Family Wine Company. And I've been sober all day and I'm ready to fix that. Okay, well, thanks again for everyone for coming in. We've got about 5 minutes before 5 o'clock. One thing you guys might notice, and Janet, thank you for pointing this out, there is a couple of banners on my Wes Hagen Facebook page, as well as my J. Wilkes Santa Barbara Facebook page, which you might be streaming this through. about Highlight Your Hero. And we are doing a program to highlight the people that are doing amazing stuff all around the country, the state, and the world. So check out that program and see what we can do to help support and celebrate all the people that are making a difference in this difficult time. So make sure to check that out. Camarillo, Lisa, it's a great place to be. Sort of in that sort of Oxnard, Camarillo, Ventura area. I was set to do a winemaker dinner. I want to make sure I say the name of the restaurant correctly. It was down in some of those really cool houses I think in Oxnard, or was it in Camarillo? But I'll have to look up the, oh no, it was Vita Dolce. La Dolce Vita. And I also done winemaker dinners down at Cafe Zach a number of times, which I find to be a great place for both lunch and for dinner. Absolutely wonderful. So, oh yeah, of course. We probably met maybe at a cave event or something like that. And welcome, Melissa. I'm seeing a couple people starting to pop on, so that's awesome. Oh, okay. Nice. Lisa, I think I know exactly who you are. Sure, I've seen you on a tour or two. Kind of keeping an eye on my other computer, which is showing my Facebook page. Definitely going to do everything I can to. And don't worry about. If you feel like talking, feel free. You raised your hand, so feels like I'm back to teaching high school. I retired early from a very lucrative career in public education, but feel free. Okay.
Is that let you talk?
Yeah, he sure does.
Hey, that's cool. Okay. I'm new to this technology.
Me too.
You don't see me though.
I do not.
Okay.
You can probably figure out how to do that too, but I would not put any pressure on, except this is a new thing for me, showering every afternoon at 4:15.
Wonderful.
Indeed. How are you?
I'm good. Well, it's been interesting with tours ending and trying to figure out what the heck's next, So just trying to, I thought, well, you know what? You're one of my favorite people up there. I always find you so entertaining.
Well, thank you.
And enthusiastic, and I always learn little tidbits from you. So I love hearing you talk. I don't know who else is on, so monopolizing time. But I remember going to see you with a girlfriend at Clo Pepe many years ago, and you were hysterical, talking about the one wine that you had that was like a stripper.
Did I go there? Perhaps a wine that was a little ripe and a little inviting, a little come hither.
Yeah.
A wine that offered pleasure with no ability to restrain itself.
I think you compared it to one wine as to a ballerina from Harvard, and the other was an 18-year-old with some plastic surgery.
Yeah, I always find the Harvard students to have better conversations going on. I find wines that have a little experience and can speak from experience tend to be much better table mates than wines that just are full of fruit and alcohol. But it is what it is, and we basically love all wines. So it's fun to talk about. It's definitely fun to talk about them in that context for sure. All right, let's see what we got. It's just about 5 o'clock. And Melissa, you are more than welcome to join the conversation as well. More than welcome. And no pressure, of course. And it looks like I will.
It says they want me to unmute it, but oh, I think I'm unmuted now. But
And let me go check on Facebook, and then I'm going to open some wine.
Cool. I think I need some wine. Hi, Melissa.
hi.
Zoom ID. Let's see. I'm going to find real quick. How do I know what Zoom ID is? Participants. More chat. More invite. Okay, 354. 354-904-983. Okay, I just got to go put this Zoom number over here, and I will be right back. Okay, so I just finally figured out, put up the Zoom ID onto the Facebook page, and that should get the rest of the people in here. So we should be in good shape. Oh, and hi, Michael.
Hey, Wes, how are you?
I'm real well. How about yourself?
Not bad, not bad.
Good. Boy, the quality on the sound on this program is really quite good. I have to say, I think I like it better than Skype. Cool. Awesome. Looks like some folks are rolling in. Fantastic. It is 5 o'clock, and I promised you guys a little conversation about Sauvignon Blanc. So I'm going to put this little bad boy down here so I can see who's here and who's talking. If you have a question, feel free to throw it down in the chat. I've got the chat open. I've got the question and answers open. I've got invites open, which I could actually close because I don't think that's going to necessarily do anything. So let's see. That goes close. I apologize. It is a kind of a new technology for me, and I'm learning it. This is, I think, the third time that I've used Zoom. So by the time this entire quarantine is over, I will be just perfectly ready to start using Zoom adequately and competently. So thank you guys so much for being patient with me and all that good stuff. And as folks come in, welcome. Again, I am Wes Hagen. I'm the winemaker for J. Wilkes Wines, and I'm also the brand ambassador for the Miller Family Wine Company. This week, we're going to do a couple of more wines in the Miller Family wine portfolio that are not J. Wilkes wines. And then I've been asked next week to really focus in and do basically purely J. Wilkes. So we're going to be doing a couple other Ballard Lane wines and a Smashberry wine this week, but then we're going to start jumping into the J. Wilkes Viognier and start talking about all things J. Wilkes. So really looking forward to sharing those J. Wilkes wines with you as well. All of the Ballard Lane wines that I'm going to be showing you today, we're doing Sauvignon Blanc, but I've also shown you the Pinot Noir as well as the Zinfandel. Chardonnay we were doing, I think, this week, but all the Ballard Lane wines are normally $15 on the website. And if you use the promo code at millerfamilywines.com, you can use MW50 and you get 50% off wines and 1 cent a case shipping. So that takes these wines down to $7.50. I just bought my dad a case this morning, shipped a case to Palm Desert, and it was $79 for the case, including shipping and tax. So really good deal on that. And that is the end of my strictly commercial. Again, when we're opening screw caps, recently we're opening them from the collar. So I'm holding the collar here and snapping that cap, and then the cap comes off really nicely. That way you don't have a chance of cutting your hand as you break the cap from the collar. So Sauvignon Blanc, sort of, you know, yet another one of those beautiful wines that really, to me, speak about summer and crisp and light. Sort of in the world of beer, these would be sort of the lagers and the Kolsch and those beautiful sort of old school Pilsner styles of beer. I would describe the color of this wine to be sort of a medium straw. So it kind of goes from kind of clear to a little bit of silver, kind of a silver to a light straw, medium straw, heavy straw, light gold, medium gold, sort of a heavy gold, down to sort of a brown or a wine that's approximating or approaching the color of a sherry. So this one has some really nice, beautiful medium straw characteristics. Never seen oak. This wine was made without any influence of oak, made in stainless steel. This is a 2017. It's got some really nice sort of apple and slate character in the nose. Smells very kind of like water on stone to me, sort of like the aroma you get if you walk out on a warm summer day where you're getting a summer rain and the rain's coming off of the concrete or something. You get that kind of nice, wet, minerally kind of character. Apple, maybe even a little bit of like baked apple. Some really nice lean character. Like it's hard to say I smell the acidity, but I can smell something that approximates acidity. Part of it is leanness, part of it is flint, part of it is almost like that stony flintness. Like part of it is almost like flint hitting flint and making a little bit of kind of the smell of a spark. Like a little quince and a little fig. You know, and I know we've been talking about, does it matter what I smell in wine, what you smell in wine, what we smell in wine? I would say in general, Scott's saying he can't see the people on Zoom. Hopefully you can see me. I think I'm the only one you're supposed to see, and then you're supposed to see names everywhere else because people, in general, the seminar leader and the panelists, if we can get some panelists on here at some point too, and let you guys come on, but you should be able to see me, Scott. You should not be able to see everybody else. And again, 2017 Ballard Lane Sauvignon Blanc, crisp and bright, nice sort of fruity aromas and some really nice sort of stony mineral aromas. Little of that flint, little of that kind of like zing. You can almost like smell, almost smells like lemon and like almost like a zingy sort of lemony kind of structure. And this is my favorite part all day. It's day drinking with Wes Hagen. Very bright, really persistent, almost like melon meets apple, meets a little bit of citrus in the palate. And it's got a really long, complex mid palate and finish. The finish stretches on with a juicy acidity and the nice figgy, appley, sort of flinty fruit. But it also has this dry fruit, but primary young, kind of very, very youthful fruit character that's very persistent in the palate. The fruit lasts quite a long time in the mouth before it sort of dissipates into a little of that acid, minerals, kind of flinty flavor. But I really like that sort of figgy, melony, long sort of mid palate and finish that this wine shows. Again, you know, for a $10 glass pour, which this would be about a $10 glass pour in most restaurants because that's about what they would pay for the wine. I would be very, very happy with Sauvignon Blanc as a glass pour. In fact, I buy Sauvignon Blanc as a glass pour. Probably my number one glass pour that I buy at restaurants is sparkling wine because my wife drinks sparkling wine. I love sparkling wine, and it's a great mealtime beverage that matches with just about everything. Now, Sauvignon Blanc, and especially the Ballard Lane, we make this Sauvignon Blanc traditionally styled in the sense that there is absolutely no oak in that wine whatsoever. It's made in a stainless steel tank at low temperature, temperature controlled, fermented cold, fermented for a long period of time, probably 2.5 months maybe on the primary fermentation. And then once the wine is bone dry, the wine is basically finished in tank and bottled without ever seeing oak and without ever being inside of a barrel. So instead of this being a Sauvignon Blanc sort of pretending or wanting to ride the coattails of the popularity of Chardonnay, a wine that is a little richer, a little bigger in the mid palate, finishing malolactic fermentation. This wine never starts malolactic, never stops malolactic, never goes through malolactic, never sees oak, never is around oak. It stays at least 6 feet away from any oak in the room. And it does a very good job of sequestering itself away from a French forest. So divorced from the flavor of French oak, it really is just that crisp, bright flavor that we get from Sauvignon Blanc in the Paso Robles Highlands district. Now, Sauvignon Blanc can be grown in almost in many regions. A lot of regions that produce high quality Pinot Noir, I'm specifically thinking about New Zealand, produce fantastic Sauvignon Blanc. Marlborough tends to be an area that's more known for Sauvignon Blanc than it is for Pinot, but still makes very, very good Pinot Noir. So the cooler the climate of Sauvignon Blanc, the more sort of grass and sort of, if you've never smelled a gooseberry, smells somewhere in between like slightly unripe green tomato and maybe like honeydew melon. So it's got kind of a melon sweetness with a tomato leaf character, like when smelling your hand after you touch a tomato leaf. Cool climate, Sauvignon Blanc tends to be very green and grassy. Hot climate, Sauvignon Blanc, as long as you get cold nights, tends to be very good as well. But what you end up getting, like Bordeaux, is a very warm region. Well, it's a region 3, maybe high region 2. So you're going to get Sauvignon Blanc in Bordeaux that's sort of on the edge of where it gets ripe. So it's going to be on the vine a little bit longer. It's going to develop flavor a little bit longer. Wines that are going to be very complex and very, very interesting because they're grown in a medium or a moderate climate. Cool climate, grassy and green. Hot climate, sort of melon and overripe fruits. And then Bordeaux, San Ynez Valley, Los Olivos district, places that are just perfectly suited for the production of Sauvignon Blanc, will show a little bit of the grassy and greenness of the cool climate and a little bit of that ripe flavor that you're going to get from the warm climate. For me, Happy Canyon Happy Canyon in Santa Barbara, yes, is a fantastic place to grow Sauvignon Blanc. We do not make a Happy Canyon Sauvignon Blanc at the Miller Family Wine Company yet, but you may or may not know I did the research and wrote the petition that established Happy Canyon of Santa Barbara as an American viticultural area. And we sort of made a decision that any place that I've been part of the production of an American viticultural area, that we are eventually going to put those wines in the portfolio. So we can talk about place and we can talk about this stuff. So Happy Canyon, I think, is going to probably have about similar heat any given day. The difference is I think you're going to see colder nights in the Paso Robles Highlands district, which is going to maintain maybe better acidity. And in Paso, the soils are going to be a little different. In Happy Canyon of Santa Barbara, you're going to get a really weird calcium to magnesium ratio as a result of the chert and the serpentine coming off the hills and the mountains and breaking down into the soil that makes the soil of Happy Canyon, which has a very interesting effect on the soil's vigor. Definitely has an interesting effect on the vigor. All right, so that is that. We talked a little bit about Ballard Lane Sauvignon Blanc. Paso Robles, although it's Central Coast appellated, it says Santa Barbara County. And now that I recall, this is not Paso Robles. It's actually Santa Barbara Highlands vineyard. So this one's up in a hotter, elevated area of Santa Barbara. That's not going to be as hot as Paso Robles, and it's not going to be as cool as Santa Maria. It tends to make very mineral, very beautiful Sauvignon Blanc. Any questions on Sauvignon Blanc before we start talking a little bit about the history of wine? And I'm going to run over and check Facebook, make sure everyone's doing all right. All right. Looks like everyone's hanging in over there, asking some questions, doing the do. If anyone has any questions or wants to speak, you're more than welcome to. It looked like someone has their hand up. All right. Here we go. Cool. Looks like everyone else is moving right along. Cool enough. Thank you again for being here with us. I'm going to attempt to share a screen right now so you guys can see a little bit of my screen, and I'm going to take you guys through about 20, maybe 25-minute discussion about where wine came from. And this is going to be just the first part of the history of wine. I will, at the end of the presentation, look for questions and ask any questions that you guys might have. And then we're going to do the second part probably next Monday. So that's exactly kind of the way that I'm hoping this is going to go. All right, I'm going to push this over here, hit a screen share, hit that, and do this. Go slideshow, go from beginning. All right. All right, so let's see. So we've got Dr. Patrick McGovern should be on your screen. And Dr. Patrick McGovern is the world's preeminent expert on fermented beverages and their history. And he's written The History of Wine. He wrote Ancient Ales. He wrote Uncorking the Past. And one of my favorite quotes from him is, in front of you, fermented beverages have been preferred over water throughout the ages. They're safer, provide psychotropic effects, and are more nutritious. Some have even said that alcohol was the primary agent for the development of Western civilization, since more healthy individuals, even if inebriated much of the time, lived longer and had greater reproductive success. So what he's saying is, for much of Western civilization, water was poisonous. Water was toxic. And if you were drinking water out of the Tiber River or out of the Dordogne or out of any river in Europe, chances are you were taking your own life in your hands, because it was very, very dangerous as a result. Are we muted automatically, asks Joseph. I think yes, but I can always look. Okay, let me see. Okay, chat. I see chat. 1 second and I will be right back. Okay. Okay. Fantastic. Moving right along. So what we're going to talk a little bit about in the history of wine is really what wine does for human beings and how it positively and potentially negatively impacts our culture. What you see in front of you is a little list of some of the things that alcohol did, sort of in a measurable impact on ancient societies. Ancient societies that drank found that their social tensions were eased, especially at night when they did their normal drinking. It would cement or strengthen reciprocal relationships within that culture, social, celebratory, economic, as well as sexual. It acts as that daily social lubrications at gatherings into daily life. It's obviously very important if you think about living 10,000 years ago, just celebrating the fact that you didn't get stung by a scorpion or bit by a snake or attacked by a saber-toothed tiger. In a time where, just 10,000 years ago, the average human being didn't even live to be 30 years old on average. The idea of living through a day was fairly miraculous, and having that ability not only to live through the day, but then to gather with your cohort, to gather with your tribe, to gather with the people that are meaningful and that you may even love, and have a fermented beverage must have seemed absolutely magical. And it still is. And obviously, the alcohol also leads to shamanistic rituals. It could be argued to have led to spirituality itself. Alcohol, obviously, and intoxication is a very important part of understanding what the human consciousness can do. Sobriety can do a number of things, but finding ways to sort of move outside of sobriety in the normal human mindset obviously had a huge impact on the development of spirituality, whether it was intoxication from alcohol, from everything from inhaling the smoke of various plants to consuming various mushrooms and or cacti species. So lots of different ways humans have taken themselves out of their own sobriety, and a lot of influences on how that impacted society. And then, of course, yeast. And yeast is so important, not only for the production of beer, wine, spirits, mead, nabid, you name it, but it's also humanity's oldest and most important industrial microorganism. There's not a lot yeast can't do for humans as far as keeping that stuff going. Okay, I saw a hand go up, and I am going to go over here. Hide thumbnail. Mute pin video. Hide self view. Stop view. Pin video. Let's see, I saw that Peter raised his hand, but I don't know how to call on him. I will go back and check on that for you to make sure I get any questions. We'll do a little Q&A at the end. So basically, when the entire world was just one continent, Pangea, right there, you basically had one grapevine within that supercontinent, Pangea, that was called Vitis ampelopsis. And Vitis ampelopsis broke into two major subspecies as these continents separated, and that was the American subspecies and the Eurasian subspecies. For some reason, grapevines did a lot better and survived in the Northern Hemisphere in a way that they just didn't in the Southern Hemisphere. Almost all the vines in the Southern Hemisphere were brought there from the Northern Hemisphere, from the North American, as well as the Eurasian subspecies of wine grapes. There is Vitaceae. Vitaceae is the largest classification of plants that are in the vine family. But as far as Vitis vinifera, Vitis sylvestris, Vitis vinifera, the vines that make the best wine in the world, were generally isolated in Europe and Asia in general. So that is the breaking up of the continents over about the last 300 million years. Well, this is one of my greatest heroes. This is Louis Pasteur, and he had no interest in milk. What he wanted to know is why beer goes bad. What is the diseases of beers, their causes, and the means of preventing them? So he took Leeuwenhoek's microscope through Lippershey, and he took that microscope and microscopy and turned it towards beer and fermented beverages. And as a result, when Pasteur in the 1850s and 1860s looked through this microscope at beer, what he saw were a bunch of incredibly tiny little living things in the solution of the beer. And what he called them was germs. And why was that important? It was very important because what Pasteur developed as a guy who was just basically trying to figure out how to make beer better, he basically invented germ theory, and germ theory is the basis for all clinical medicine in the world today. So you can argue that all modern medicine and the ability to see modern medicine, germs, bacteria, viruses, all of this stuff started with Louis Pasteur looking through his compound microscope, trying to figure out what was going on with beer. So fermentation and fermentation science is absolutely crucial and critical to the understanding of science and medicine. So a couple little things we're going to talk a little bit about. Alcohol. Now, how does alcohol become detoxified in the human body? How do we use alcohol without it slowly toxifying and killing us? and then a little bit about beer, because I love how beer and the story of beer just dovetails perfectly into this conversation about wine. Vitis vinifera from the Caucasus through Europe via the Romans, Gauls, and the birds. And then that last one will be in part 2. So why alcohol? So alcohol is produced by yeast to protect oozing ripe fruit from other hungry critters by making a toxic byproduct of alcohol. So it's sort of like if you only have one Twinkie and your brother is trying to steal your Twinkie, what do? Well, if you got to leave the room, you might think about licking the Twinkie and leaving it. So if your brother's going to have to eat that Twinkie, it's got your saliva on it. And that's what these yeast are doing. Yeast produce alcohol as a toxic byproduct to try to keep other animals off of their oozing ripe fruit food source. So ethanol alcohol is just basically a toxic byproduct of fermentation that yeast made to try to keep other critters off their food. But it turns out that fermenting fruit has so much calorie value and is so valuable to animals by virtue of its nutriment and the amount of calories it has. Other animals started doing everything they could to eat little bits of this oozing fruit and putting their bodies through a little bit of toxicity and hassle to try to work it through. So eventually evolution by natural selection would take over. So those calories were wide available for all those animals as food. So those animals had an evolutionary race to see who could figure out how to detoxify alcohol in their bloodstream first. So evolution favored the creatures that could better tolerate or metabolize ethanol, and it gave them access to the ripest fruit, an economic, nutritional, euphoric dividend that it provides. Also, you can smell fermentation. So if you can smell fermentation and you can metabolize fermentation as calories, that means you can smell the ripest fruit in the forest, and that gives you an evolutionary benefit as well. So almost all humans produce this ALDH1 enzyme, that's alcohol dehydrogenase enzyme. And that enzyme is produced by our liver. And what it does is it knocks a hydrogen ion off of the ethanol molecule to make it aldehydic. Aldehyde is absorbed through the human bloodstream and is an acetate. Acetate is energy. So the human bloodstream and the human liver breaks down ethanol to make it absorbable as an energy source. Now, some Asians lack this enzyme and have the variant, the ADH1B enzyme variant, which when they drink alcohol, they flush and become red because they can't break down ethanol. They can't dehydrogenize the ethanol, and it still has sort of an impact on their body generally. Asians, Native Americans, Inuit, and other cultures that generally didn't have the benefit of thousands of years of an evolutionary relationship with alcohol in their culture. And then the 10% rule, and you'll like this one. 10% of the enzymatic function of your liver is to produce dehydrogenase enzyme. That means 10% of the enzymatic function of your liver is meant to break down alcohol and to have it available as energy in your blood. So I would say that is a reasonable assumption that your body expects a European or a modern human to use about 10% of their daily calorie intake in the form of ethanol. Now, for most people, that's between 200 and 300 calories a day, or between 1.5 drinks for women and about 2 drinks for men, which is generally the medically suggested amount of alcohol that a human drinks if they choose to drink. And of course, red wine is the safest way to put alcohol in the human body that's ever been discovered by human beings. So my 10% rule is if 10% of my liver is doing nothing but producing an enzyme to produce energy from alcohol, I'm going to meet my liver halfway and make sure it has that 10% of ethanol in my diet each day, so we can break that down and stay busy and not be lazy and not be lonely because it's making dehydrogenase enzyme that has nothing to work on. All right, make sure I don't have a lonely liver. It's a good day for Sauvignon Blanc. All right, moving right along. My favorite animal on the planet Earth, the Malay pen-tailed shrew. It's about that big. It's about 3 inches tall. They're the only known they're the only known mammal besides humans that consume alcohol every night and their entire diet consists almost exclusively on the fermenting froth of the Bertram palm. They drink the equivalent of 3 to 4 bottles of wine a night, 10 to 12 bar drinks per night. They find these bubbling palm trees that produce this pretty strong alcohol, almost 4% alcohol, and they just sit there all night and just licking it. Now, Malaysia is not a safe place for a little fuzzy critter. A lot of snakes, a lot of birds of prey, a lot of things that would eat them. Now, the craziest thing about this little mammal, this little tree shrew, the little proto mammal, is it drinks the equivalent of 3 to 4 bottles of wine a night and shows no outward signs of intoxication. So as you might imagine, there are a number of scientists currently spending a lot of time studying the pen-tailed shrew and its amazing liver and how it can basically use alcohol like it does without any seeming negative impact on what they're doing. All right, so that's my little aside on the pen-tailed shrew. Okay, no, I did not hear you, Joseph, but I was able to take people off mute, but now that I'm into my presentation, I'm going to just finish the presentation real quick, and I just got a couple more slides, and then we'll open it up to some questions. Beer. So human beings have been on the planet 100,000 years. 100,000 years, we didn't really do much. 90,000 of those years, we just basically were hunter-gatherers. But we invented beer about 10,000 years ago, and everything's changed. So just, in the couple hundred years after the invention of beer, or that we figured out how to make beer, we invented irrigation, mathematics, the wheel, writing, the pyramids, and then later factories, refrigeration, and the end of child labor. All of these things can be basically argued to be part of the invention of beer. Irrigation, obviously, the agricultural revolution between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers in Mesopotamia was really driven by cereal production. Why were we producing cereal? To make beer. We didn't make beer. We didn't make bread out of cereal until at least 1,000 years into the agricultural revolution. So the plow, irrigation, all of these incredibly important things, mathematics, figuring out what an acre was, how much grain was necessary to make enough beer for a human being, which was basically an acre. All of this stuff was basically invented and was a support system to make sure that human beings could create as much beer as they needed, and really, really did. The pyramids, of course, were not built by slaves. They were built by workers who were paid in beer, and it was about 480 million gallons of beer were paid to the workers that built the pyramids. The first factories, one of the first car-related factories after Henry Ford helped develop the production line in factories. The people that really took that concept and ran with it were the German beer producers previous to World War I. These factories, these large factory breweries became very, very important to the development and establishment of American corporations and commerce. The last thing that children did as labor in the United States was to blow glass beer bottles. So when we finally figured out a machine that could blow glass beer bottles, there was no longer any significant child labor left in the United States. Also, beer was responsible for refrigeration and air conditioning, because the first refrigeration and chilling units ever made in the world were made to make lager beer in New York City. So first refrigeration units, first lagering units. You could argue that everything from irrigation, mathematics, the wheel, writing, pyramids, refrigeration, air conditioning are all due to beer. So thank you, beer. We really appreciate you. The first human writing, use of numbers, were used to catalog beer recipes. And the oldest existing piece of human writing is actually a beer recipe. So very, very important to ancient civilization. And somehow the importance of beer never quite made it to the original sort of our first and second grade world history text. But seriously, when I say that beer making was absolutely vital to the history of the world. And then the Egyptians and the Nubians actually brewed medicinal beers that actually contain tetracycline. And how did they brew a beer with tetracycline? We still don't know. We know we know the recipe. We know that when we brew that recipe, we can end up with tetracycline. But the Egyptians and the Nubians figured out how to brew medicinal beer thousands of years before the same medicines that we thought we invented were actually in medicinal beers thousands of years ago. So go beer, what a beautiful thing it is. So this is a picture of the oldest, a recreation of the oldest archaeologically confirmed alcoholic beverage on the planet Earth. And we call it Chateau Jahu. And Chateau Jahu was discovered after some ceramic was discovered in China near the Yellow River. That ceramic had obviously some sediment in it. The sediment was tested by Dr. Patrick McGovern at the University of Pennsylvania, who found basically by doing a chromatography and studying it, found the ingredients of rice, honey, grape juice, hawthorn fruit. And this is the oldest confirmed alcoholic beverage in the world. And this was almost 12,000 years ago. So, you know, the Chinese culture learned to fire pottery about 3,000 years before the West. And as a result, we have pottery shards that actually contain remnants of alcoholic beverages far older than anything from Europe. So the thing is we can only go back with alcohol history as long as we have a ceramic to prove what was in it. And so whatever alcoholic beverages were in wood or leather or stone, we'll never know. We have to have ceramic because ceramic traps the tartaric acid and the malvodin and all of the other materials and ingredients within the sort of the molecular structure of that ceramic, which is very important. So that is the oldest confirmed beverage. It's made by Dogfish Head Brewery. And you can buy that recreation and actually taste it. And I'm sure it's a lot cleaner and brighter and more beautiful than it was in 9600 BCE. Okay, so real quick breakdown of where the grapevine came from. So I mentioned 200 million years ago, basically the continents cracked and separated, and Vitis ampelopsis evolved and broke into the American and European subspecies. The European and Eurasian wine grape, Vitis vinifera sylvestris, it died in between each one of the ice age, and it dies and lives. And the last ice age basically left the last living grapevines alive between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, and every other grapevine within the region where it can grow and make wine was basically died out. In this little region, a lot of human beings moved back into this area between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, which we'll see is Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Anatolian Turkey, and the uplands of Iran. This area represents the cradle of wine civilization, where there was a domestication event between the Neolithic and the Chalcolithic. Neolithic meaning New Stone Age, Chalcolithic meaning the Copper Age, that left us not with a male vine, not with a female vine, but a perfected vine that had both male and female parts, and that pollinated itself much, much more successfully than the original two-sexed vine. So we end up getting out of the Chalcolithic with a domesticated, both-sexed, perfected, hermaphroditic grapevine that we could basically move from area to area and would produce amazing amounts of grapes, because it's this domesticated grapevine that produces so much fruit compared to just the male and the female progenitors. So this is kind of what your perfected vine looks like, right? The vine that you see in the color picture on the right is just a male vine of American subspecies. That's just Vitis riparia. That's a male vine, and all it does is produce pollen. There's no grapes on that vine whatsoever. Just pollen goes out and tries to pollinate those grapes, so it produces fruit with a seed. Now you can see the other parts. The little cap falls off. You can see in sort of the bottom middle, there's a berry with 5 male parts surrounding it, and that's the perfected vine. The little berry part in the middle is the ovary, or the uva, which of course The word ovary actually comes from uva, which is Latin for grape, and 5 male parts surrounding the female part, the 5 male pollinating areas, basically with the corolla, really looking to pollinate the little sticky, that little sticky part at the top of the uva. And as long as one little bit of pollen gets down on the uva, boom, you got pollination, and you're going to get a grape with a seed in it. If it doesn't pollinate, the seed would abort, or the grape would abort and fall off. Cool. So that is the emergence of the perfected vine, the hermaphroditic vine, or what we like to call, it would be hermaphroditic. So, yep, this is the area where grapes really begin. These are the area where the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea kept this little region from getting so cold that all the grapevines did not die during the last ice age. So there you got it. You've got Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, little bits of the uplands of Iran and Anatolian Turkey. This is the area really where the beginning of the cradle of wine civilization. You can see the red star that says Tiflis. It's actually Tbilisi. We would call it Tbilisi, and that's Tbilisi, Georgia. And that is where the oldest wine ceramic in the world was found, that takes wine in Europe back to almost 9,000 years ago. So they were putting wine in jars in Georgia, in South Ossetia, and sort of to the east of the Black Sea and to the west of the Caspian Sea almost 10,000 years ago. And this is an Italian map. That's why it says Mar Negro instead of the Black Sea, and Mar Caspio instead of the Caspian Sea. You can see in these little green areas, original viticultural areas that were producing wine 3,000 years or longer ago. There is, of course, the area of Persia. You have Phoenicia, Mesopotamia, the Caucasus, and then, of course, the Nile River. And note also that there was an established North African wine industry before there was a single domesticated vine in Western Europe. There really wasn't much outside of maybe the sort of northern Hellenic peninsula up in Demetria, but nothing even close to over the Danube. So it's so interesting to know that there was North African wine being produced in fairly large amounts before there were ever wine being produced in Western Europe. And this is kind of where we're going to close the first part of it. And that is kind of what happened and where the wine kind of went. Remember, I said it started in between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. So that would be on the right side of that map, down where the number 1 is. And so, you know, it's going down towards Phoenicia and the Canaanites. And then from the Phoenicia and the Canaanites peninsula goes down simultaneously between Crete and down into Egypt and the Nile River, up into the Hellenic peninsula, you know, over through Turkey and some of those areas. And then look at this. So from Greece, of course, you know, the Italians get jealous and the Romans get jealous. So the Greeks give it to the Romans and the Sicilians. And then the Sicilians, it basically goes again through North Africa, all the way up to basically Straits of Gibraltar, over into basically into Spain and Portugal, and then up towards, and then kind of meets simultaneously from Italy up into Gaul, into France, up basically through trade and the in the Rhone River estuary with the Gauls, trading generally for what the Gauls really wanted, which was lumber and honey. And then of course, the Gauls, it starts moving up through a little bit into Northern Europe, into the lowlands, and then back down through Eastern Europe. And also in the time of Rome, it was certainly warm enough in the southern United Kingdom that we know today that southern England was producing good, solid wine at that point. And then, of course, as human beings were spreading these vines and taking them from country to country and culture to culture, Well, the birds were eating the grapes, and the birds were spreading it as well. And the Canaanites were taking it around, and the Etruscans were taking it around. The Carthaginians were taking it around. The Romans were moving it around quite a bit. So it was kind of a combination of 4 or 5 large ancient cultures, and then, you know, birds and animals continuing to eat those, eat the plants and eat the vines. And there's really only one reason why grapes produce sugar, and that's to get animals to eat the fruit, to encourage the animals to spread the seed. And so you could just argue that all fruit is delicious because nature wants animals to eat the seeds or eat the fruit and travel. And the bitter coating of a seed is to encourage the animals not to actually crunch the seeds, but to swallow them whole. So when they fly to a different part of the forest, the seed falls out intact and a new grapevine can grow someplace. I believe that is the end of part 1. So I'm going to leave this up for about another 30 seconds. Now that promo code is incorrect. The promo code, if you want, you should use MW50. MW50. All right. Let's see. I'm going to stop the share and I will remind you of that. Okay. Let me see. Oh, yeah. So Peter asked why Mondavi renamed Sauvignon Blanc to Fumé Blanc. That probably was a result. I remember the story, and I thought it was a marketing ploy that Sauvignon Blanc, he decided to call it Fumé Blanc because it sounded a little bit more like a French wine, and the Fumé might give people a little bit more kind of like, it sounds a little more French, but you know, there was certainly nothing different about Fumé Blanc than Sauvignon Blanc. It was just kind of a marketing moment that seemed to work really well. All right, participants. So one thing I can do, I am going to give, okay, so Joseph. I'm putting some more kind of allow to talk. If you guys feel like unmuting, I'm just going to start unmuting people. And we'll see if that was a mistake or not. All right, so many of you can now speak.
It's a miracle. I can speak.
Congratulations.
I didn't know if there was going to be an opportunity to throw in a question or not, but I just didn't know if you could hear me and my wife talking while we were watching your webinars.
No, okay, now I can. I thought I would get through the presentation, and I'm hoping the presentation and my my voice were fairly synced up.
Oh, you did great.
Oh, good. Good. That was a lot of talking. Let me get a little liquid down my throat.
Yeah, I would imagine you're a little parched.
Just a touch.
A
That
wee
was
bit.
that was loads of good fun. If anyone has any questions, I would love to talk about them a little bit. They could be about wine, beer, spirits, the history of such, drinking, production.
All right, Wes, I've got one.
Sure, Michael.
Canopy management on Sauv Blanc to get rid of the excessive pyrazines. How does one go about that, and where does it need to be done more aggressively on in region-wise?
So we're talking about viticulture and we're talking about canopy management. The whole idea of canopy management is to allow sun flecking, and this is a very good indication of sun flecking, onto the fruit to remove the vegetal aromas. Here's a magic thing about grapes. If you allow sunlight to fleck on the developing fruit on a grapevine, the grapes, that sunlight will destroy all the vegetal and herbaceous character within those grapes and encourage the production of floral aromatics in white wine and sort of high toned red and black fruit flavor in red grapes. So here's the key in one sentence to canopy management. Open up your canopy as much as you can without endangering your fruit from sunburn. Here's the issue. Sauvignon Blanc is grown from region 1B all the way to region 4. The coolest climate where wine grapes can be grown to the hottest climate where wine grapes can be grown. So in the coolest climate, we can pull those leaves down to just let those clusters hang almost like profanely naked, to let them absorb as much of that sun and to get rid of all the pyrazines as possible. And that's important because in cool climate Sauvignon Blanc, you're going to have a lot of those green pyrazine characters. Now, if I had a pure extract of pyrazine in front of each one of you and you smelled it, you'd say, ooh, that smells just like a green bell pepper. So if you smell green bell pepper in any wine you ever drink, whether it's Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay tends to show pyrazine like a little bit of canned olive. So if you smell canned olive in your Chardonnay, or you're drinking some cheap Cabernet or some cheap Merlot, and it smells like green bell pepper, and you don't want to say something nasty to the person that's poured it for you, you can say something like, oh, clearly this was grown in a shaded canopy. And they won't know what you're talking about, but you will. And that will mean chances are there's a little bit of green character. Now, if you go to a hot climate, here's the issue. Sauvignon Blanc is going to come off the vine first. If you're going to be harvesting Cabernet in late September, you're going to be picking your Sauvignon Blanc in mid-August, sometimes even earlier. So in a hot climate, you've got faster ripening and more of a chance of burning the fruit. So here's what Davis says, and you always go back to the science because everything in grape growing is anecdotal, but science actually works much better than anecdote. 10% of ambient sunlight on the fruit through sun flecking and direct sun exposure on the cluster is all that's necessary to completely remove all pyrazines in any wine grape anywhere in the world. So start at 10%. You know you need to get your canopy, your leaves pulled. So, okay, right? So here's the example. That's a leaf. That's no leaf. That's one leaf layer. That's 0 leaf layers. That's 2 leaf layers. That's 1 leaf layer. So you never want more than 1 leaf between you and the cluster, or between the sunlight and the cluster. But you also want to make sure that the cluster has enough protection that it just doesn't turn into a poor little desiccated raisin that can't make wine. So 10% ambient sunlight, and then add a little bit more, pull a little more leaves every year until you learn how much you can pull and how much you can't pull. What I always say is if you have a small vineyard, do leaf pulling trials every row. Do, 1 row minimal, 1 row 10%, 1 row 20%, and see what happens to the fruit, and then fine tune accordingly.
Thank you, Wes.
Absolutely, it's a good question. And a good question for Sauvignon Blanc in particular, because every grape, specifically Pinot Noir, would have a different answer to that. How do you pull leaves in Chardonnay? How do you pull leaves in Pinot? How do you pull leaves in Cabernet? How do you pull leaves in Sparkling? Because that's going to be much different anyways. Sparkling wine or rosé, you want to pull more leaves because you want to develop more flavor at lower bricks. And you don't have to worry about the grapes hanging until the hottest part of the summer or fall. Cool. Any questions about the history or Sauvignon Blanc, food and wine? Yes, Paul. Well, I saw Paul talking. He might have been on his way. Cool. Well, I hope you guys all learned something about where grapes come from and where wine comes from. I've got the other half. We're going to talk about a little bit about the Greeks and the Romans. We're going to talk a little bit about philosophy and the development of democracy vis-a-vis alcohol. We're going to talk a little bit about the Middle Ages and how much wine we drank. We're going to talk a little bit about coffee and how the Viennese finding the coffees that the Moors left in the 15th century basically caused a movement throughout Europe of sobering up for long enough that we have the Age of Enlightenment, which will be a lovely conversation. And then again, whatever you guys want to talk about, I will be here tasting yet another delicious wine tomorrow. I'll be online usually 10 minutes before 5, and then we'll start this up as close to 5, and I'll get all this technology stuff worked out. So thank you guys for showing up the second week and listening. I hope it was valuable to you, and we'll jump in and we'll see you guys all tomorrow. If you have any other questions, let me know. You're very, very welcome, Barney. Appreciate you guys coming out, and we'll figure out how to make sure all of you can participate as much or as little as you want, and you are heard and or not heard. And appreciate your questions. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Wes. Cheers.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate that.
Great job. Thanks, Wes.
Take care, Wes.
Cheers. Be well, guys.
Thanks, Wes. Cheers.
Thank you, Wes. Cheers.
To you. Be well. Thank you.
Trying to figure out how to turn it off.
Me too.
I don't know.
I'll just end it, then you have no choice.
Thank you.